This is VOA Africa.
Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Thursday, July 1st. Welcome to Africa 54. We're still working remotely because of the coronavirus pandemic. But what hasn't changed is our commitment to bringing you the latest and most important news from the African continent and around the world. Here is today's Africa 54. A video obtained by Reuters is purporting to show a group of fighters from the Nigerian Islamist group Boko Haram pledging their allegiance to rival group, the Islamic State West Africa province, just weeks after the former group's leader, Abubakar Shekau, died. The video fuels fears that the Islamic State group is consolidating control of the insurgency in northeastern Nigeria, but not all observers are convinced. The video is proof that all Boko Haram fighters are ready to join the Islamic State West Africa province. The groups have been fierce rivals for years, and if they join forces, they could focus their attention on attacking the Nigerian military. The United Nations says 350,000 people have died because of the 12-year insurgency and subsequent humanitarian crisis. The Niger Delta region of Nigeria is endowed with oil, which accounts for nearly 80% of the country's wealth. For decades, however, tensions between militants and foreign oil companies have wreaked havoc for area residents. Most schools are closed. There are limited health facilities and lack of basic infrastructure such as electricity and water. In part 2 of my interview with Ngozi Bell, a native of Nigeria and a partner with Trans-Sahara Investment Corporation, I began by asking her how President Muhammadu Buhari's government has addressed the grinding poverty for Niger Delta residents.
You know, it's a tough thing because on the one hand, they're trying to address it, but on the other hand, they're not addressing it because they have no real focus on the problem. You have technocrats, you have people with the ability to really help the government do what they need to do. So it's not a lack of resources, it's to put the environment right.
In 2020, we saw Nigerians come together to protest police brutality, asking to end SARS, the notorious police unit. Most recently, the president banned Twitter, and like all other countries, COVID-19 has impacted Nigeria's economy. Is the country sitting on a powder keg?
Yes, Nigeria is seated on a keg of gunpowder, but I don't believe it's going to explode. Nigerian youth completely depend on social media, right? Not just for entertainment, but for work. They've created amazing resources. They've created return on investment, leveraging these social media platforms. So when a government that doesn't really have a plan for the youth takes away this major resource, they're literally impacting the livelihood of a lot of young people who have created their own livelihood. People are beginning to agitate, and it's not the agitation of the 60s or the 70s. This is a whole new type of agitation that is bringing a whole different type of coalitions together.
What does the president need to do to redeem himself and the country?
I think the first thing the president needs to do is to decentralize. He has to give states reasonable autonomy. States have to make their own resources, make their own income, take advantage of the resources that they have, and then commercialize those and be responsible to their citizens. He has to hold a free and fair election.
Looking at all those things, what's Nigeria's standing in West Africa right now?
I would say that Nigeria is still and will continue to be number one in West Africa and Africa in general, right? Biggest economy, largest population. For the first time in history, there is a coalition and a partnership and an awakening that really matters to people like it has never mattered before. You have the north, parts of the north, you have the middle belt, you have the southwest, you have the southeast, now sitting together and saying, we're not going to cede the autonomy of this entire country to a group of people who want to run it anyway at the expense of the rest of the people. So they're coming together and they're coming up, they're demanding policies, they're demanding the constitution be reviewed. They're saying that the Niger Delta that you mentioned needs to be rewarded. that they need to have some stake in what they produce so that they can alleviate themselves from poverty. So I believe that Nigeria's standing will be good. Its social standing will be good. Its economic standing will be good. It's going to take a lot of work.
Ngozi Bell is a native of Nigeria and a partner at the Trans-Sahara Investment Corporation. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says his federal forces withdrew from Tigray's capital Mekelle because it was no longer the center of gravity. But a spokesman for the Tigray People's Liberation Front says that's not true. David Doyle has the details.
Ethiopia's army has pulled out of Tigray's capital Mekelle because the place is no longer the center of gravity, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has said, contradicting statements from Tigrayan forces that Ethiopian troops are on the run.
It was a center of a government, a center for known and unknown resources. But by the time we exit, there's nothing special about it except that there are some 80,000 people, and those people who loot. Otherwise, there's nothing that makes it different from Abiy Adi or Shiraro or Bashasha. It's lost its center of gravity in the current context.
Abiy's statement, posted online on Wednesday, comes after the Ethiopian government declared a unilateral ceasefire on Monday. That was amid reports that downtown Mekelle had been reached by forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front, the ethnically based party that dominated Ethiopian politics for nearly 3 decades. Footage also emerged of celebrations in the town of Shire after Eritrean troops allied to the federal forces had reportedly left. An Ethiopian government spokesman said Eritreans had withdrawn from the region. Eritrea's information minister did not immediately respond to requests for comment. Thousands of people have been killed and 2 million displaced since the conflict broke out in November. The United Nations has said at least 350,000 people are facing famine and 5 million others need immediate food aid in the worst global food crisis in a decade. The Ethiopian government spokesman, Redwan Hussein, also said that the ceasefire was a political decision for a humanitarian cause. Hussein warned that, if required, federal soldiers could return to Mekelle in less than 3 weeks. But TPLF spokesman Getachew Reda claimed the federal troops were forced out and called Abiy's statement a lie. "We bested them in their own game," he said via satellite phone. They lost.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations is calling on Russia to stop violence by mercenaries working as an arm of Russia's Ministry of Defense in Central African Republic. In a statement released Wednesday, Linda Thomas-Greenfield said Russia should hold accountable those responsible. UN sanctions monitors reported to the Security Council that Russian military instructions and CAR troops targeted civilians with excessive force, indiscriminate killings, occupation of schools, and large-scale looting. The Kremlin described the accusations in the UN report as a lie. The COVID-19 pandemic has strained families forced to work and study at home together, with an added stress for couples who are also business partners. In Kenya, such life-work partnerships experience a struggle to not only earn a living, but also to keep their families together. Brenda Mulinya reports from Nairobi.
Dan Omondi and his wife Millicent Atieno have been selling fish for 6 years on the outskirts of Kenya's capital, Nairobi.
We live together, we work together, and that's it. And we enjoy it.
Social distancing during the coronavirus pandemic means they spend even more time together, while the economic squeeze means customers buy less. Omondi says having clearly defined roles and boundaries has helped their business partnership survive the added stress.
If we have a disagreement at home, then you bring it here. Even the client will realize there is disagreement between these two. So that we had talked about that, and we said, if in case there is an issue at home, we'll finish it at home. In case there is an issue at work, we'll finish it at work. And that's how we operate.
But not all life-work partnerships run so smoothly. Susan Keter and her husband Sami ran a branding business for 3 years until they were forced to close it in 2010, putting a strain on their marriage.
It was difficult for all of us. All of us were, I would say we were broken by the fact that we didn't succeed in the business, yet we were all very passionate about what we were doing.
Therapist Edna Chawiyah says a strong relationship is needed for a life partnership to survive a failed business one.
If you want to do business together, have a conversation, really have a conversation. Not just how exciting the business actually is, but how are we going to run it? What if we don't make it? Who is to blame? Are we both to blame? Is one of us to blame? How do we make decisions around employing people or not?
Keter's marriage survived, and while the venture collapsed, it inspired her to start another one, mentoring women and couples in the business sector. Brenda Molinya for VOA News, Nairobi.
Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan marked her first 100 days in office this week with the announcement of new measures in combating the COVID-19 pandemic, including opening of several COVID-19 testing centers, calling for the coronavirus vaccine in the country, and asking people to wear masks during public appearances. VOA Swahili has this report narrated by Grace Oyenobi.
Real development is only realized when we develop together.
Samia Suluhu Hassan, 61, took over a country that was being treated as outcast after the late President John Pombe Magufuli announced that the coronavirus had been vanquished in the country and stopped publishing COVID-19 data. After more than a year, Tanzania has finally released figures on coronavirus, confirming 100 cases since a third wave of infections began. The government has also budgeted $470 million to buy COVID-19 vaccine, actions that mark a sharp turnaround from Hassan's predecessor. Speaking to the media on her first 100 days anniversary, President Hassan said her government has applied to join the World Health Organization-backed COVAX vaccine sharing project.
Tarehe 15 Juni ilikuwa ni mwisho.
15th of June was the deadline for application to those who will get vaccine from COVAX program in 2022. If you didn't register until 15th of June this year, then the vaccine that you will get will be in 2023. We had to hurry to register, so we are on the list. Now our medical experts are working on figuring out which vaccine should come to Tanzania and how.
Mengine ya kuagiza na chanjo ipi na nini yatafuata, lakini tumeharakisha kusema na sisi tumo.
President Magufuli's anti-corruption policies and emphasis on discipline, hard work, and significant investments in major public works won praise from many. But there were complaints of the suppression of the space and allegations of human rights violations. Things look different in the country now, according to a Tanzanian political analyst, Abdul Karim Atiki.
With the constitutional powers that a president has, she could have decided to continue with her predecessor's policies. But we thank God she has opened up doors. And I advise opposition that he shouldn't have the language that he used to have during Magufuli's era. She has shown that she's a diplomatic person.
Samia Suluhu Hassan has been meeting with various heads of state and organizations to open up and strengthen Tanzania diplomatic relations and reinforce her political influence across the region and beyond. From holding meetings with key players in the global economy to recent visits to neighboring Uganda and Kenya, she has been shaping Tanzania's outlook to the outside world, says Hezron Mogambi, professor at NAIROBI University.
Instead of being aggressively negative with the neighbors, especially to Kenya, what she has done is that she has come out more cooperative, and she has shown a lot of positive attitude towards her neighbors, contrary to or in the opposite direction that John Pombe Magufuli, the late, was doing. So she has brought a lot of positive impetus, and in terms of looking at her from the outside, you can say that she has injected some positive energy into the entire East African cooperation and the good neighborliness.
In another turnaround from her predecessor's policies, President Hassan announced the revival of a $10 billion stalled port project on the eastern coast of the country. The government of the late Magufuli had complained that the conditions proposed by the investors, which included Oman's State General Reserve Fund, were commercially unviable. Port expert and director of Maritime Harvest Consultants Tanzania, Julius Nguhula, warns that the government should look at this carefully.
For the Bagamoyo port, it's a big investment which doesn't need rushing decisions. When investors come to Tanzania, they don't have compassion with Tanzania. We are the ones who have to make decisions. So I say the president need to look at this very carefully.
Recently, President Hassan cursed the stir when she ordered the country's central bank to prepare for the use of cryptocurrencies as legal tender in the country.
That was a report from VOA Swahili, narrated by Grace Oyenubi. Coming up, Zimbabwean artists transform deadly wild dog poaching snares into crafts. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Africa 54. The issue of reparations, making amends for historical wrongs perpetrated against a group or population, is highly controversial. But to the victims of atrocities like genocide and slavery, offering such compensation should be a no-brainer. VOA's Mariama Diallo looks at examples of reparations as they relate to the debate over reparations for African Americans in the United States.
Slavery officially ended in the U.S. in 1865 with the adoption of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution. But its effects have persisted, contributing to disparities between white and Black populations. Because of this, many say that amends must be made for the wrong that was done, and they are long overdue.
Today we launch Mayors Organized for Reparations and Equity, or MORE. So each of us does something more. Makes more of a commitment to justice, more of a commitment to wealth building, more of a commitment to a society that includes everybody, more of a commitment to a country that faces its past because we know our prosperity in the future depends on it.
Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti and mayors of 10 other cities are taking the first step by pledging to pay reparations for slavery to a small group of Black residents in their cities.
When I hear about mayors taking a proactive step to provide reparations to people who are injured, it's an acknowledgement that municipalities also participated in the horrific acts that have injured Black communities and Black people over the course of American history. We did not arrive at a wealth gap where white families have about 10 times the amount of wealth as Black families simply because of federal policy, not just because of slavery, but because of Jim Crow racism also, and historic discrimination in criminal justice and housing.
Yet discussing the issue of reparations at the federal level has always been partisan political football. Perry says there have been many examples of reparations efforts both in the U.S. and in other countries.
When it comes to African Americans, we say, no, who will pay for it? I didn't own any slaves, and all these lame excuses. Remember, the federal government will pay. We provided reparations for the Japanese intern. We provided reparations for Native Americans internationally. There was reparations for those who injured because of the Holocaust. So we've seen it internationally. We've even seen it at reparations given to 9/11 victims. The only time we don't agree with reparations is when it's talking about Black folk.
2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, which prompted the U.S. entry into World War II, Then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued an executive order against Japanese Americans.
Many rightfully so call this one of the darkest times in American history, when close to 120,000 Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from their homes on the West Coast and placed into concentration camps scattered throughout the country, although largely in some very remote areas of the United States, on the Great Plains, a couple in California, and even as far east as Arkansas. But a lot of this was rooted in basically wartime hysteria, the false claims by the government that Japanese Americans were a security threat to this country.
Nearly 5 decades later, in 1988, Congress passed and former President Ronald Reagan signed legislation that recognized and apologized for the mistake and provided a cash payment to anyone who was interned.
Payment was ultimately was $20,000 per person. They did have to be surviving, that if someone had been incarcerated and passed away, they would not then be eligible for a payment, or their survivors would not be eligible for a payment.
Other countries have also acknowledged and paid for their past sins, including Germany and the United Kingdom. As of 2020, the German government has paid more than $80 billion in Holocaust reparations as a result of negotiations with national and international Jewish organizations. In 2013, the United Kingdom apologized and agreed to pay compensation to thousands of veterans of the Mau Mau nationalist uprising in Kenya, which was brutally suppressed by the British colonial government in the 1950s. The Kenyan Human Rights Commission estimated that 90,000 Kenyans were killed or maimed and 160,000 detained. In Kenya, Mau Mau veterans and campaigners welcomed the apology at the time, but said the compensation of 300,000 shillings, or about $3,500 per victim, was not enough for the pain, suffering, and long-term effects the community has endured, a feeling shared by many victims of atrocities in general. While reparations can come in many forms, some people oppose cash compensation, arguing that any money paid is blood money. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Washington.
The African wild dog, or African painted dog, is one of the world's most endangered mammals, with less than 7,000 remaining, mostly because of human-wildlife conflict. In Zimbabwe, the Painted Dog Conservation Group finds and removes thousands of snares every year that can kill or injure the dogs and turns them into crafts to raise funds for their protection. Columbus Mavunga reports from Hwange, Zimbabwe.
Situated near Hwange National Park, Zimbabwe's biggest wildlife sanctuary, Painted Dog Conservation's anti-poaching unit removes and collects over 3,000 snares a year put by poachers. David Kuvaogam, operations manager at Painted Dog Conservation, says that saves quite a number of animal lives, especially the endangered painted dogs.
Poachers themselves don't target painted dogs. They target the prey for painted dogs, which is mainly kudu and impala. But when they set the snares, they set in tracks where kudus and impala move, and painted dogs who are looking for food, they also move in the same tracks as they track their food.
The anti-poaching unit is mainly comprised of people from nearby who value wildlife, such as 27-year-old Belinda Nguhula.
Anti-poaching is important to me because I now know the importance of the wildlife through anti-poaching, and we are saving animals, those animals which helps us to get employed. Like now I'm employed, and it's also helping us to get tourists from other countries.
53-year-old July Mhlanga is one of the artists benefiting from the snares collected from the bush by Painted Dog Conservation's anti-poaching unit. The artists turn the snares into crafts and sell them to zoos around the world.
Now I've taken all these kids to higher school and they've finished, so it means that there is an improvement that I managed to pay, apart from asking from other people for money.
Hilary Madzikanda, a former ecologist with Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, says Africa has under 7,000 painted dogs, but at the turn of the century, the continent had over 500,000. That was because people were getting incentives to kill them as they were considered useless.
Because of the informed position of science, that we realize that they play a critical role in the environment, and then the persecution stopped. But however, the decline had reached such levels that dogs for the foreseeable future would remain a low species population.
With intensified anti-poaching on the continent, Madzikanda says Africa would have a good number of painted dogs to keep the herbivores population in check to ensure vegetation is not overgrazed. Columbus Mavungam for VOA News, Hwange, Zimbabwe.
American comedian Bill Cosby became a free man Wednesday after the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court overturned his 2018 conviction on sexual assault charges, and he was released from prison. Africa 54 managing editor Vincent McCory has this report.
The 83-year-old Cosby returned to his Philadelphia area home hours after the state's highest court threw out his conviction. Cosby received a 3 to 10-year prison sentence based on testimony he gave in 2005 in a lawsuit brought against him by Andrea Constand, who accused him of sexual assault after he gave her a sedative without her knowledge, leaving her incapacitated. However, the court said the prosecutor at the time assured Cosby his testimony would not be used against him in a criminal trial, a promise which applied to any future prosecutor. The frail Cosby stood with his legal team to celebrate the court's decision after his release.
Obviously, we are thrilled to have Mr. Cosby home. He served 3 years of an unjust sentence.
Too long, too long.
He did it with dignity and principle, and he was a mentor to other inmates. He was really, as I say, doing the time. The time was not doing him.
Constand's accusation was one of dozens leveled against the popular entertainer, many of them going back decades. His conviction was one of the first in the so-called Me Too era, which saw scores of women coming forward to accuse powerful men in entertainment, media, and politics of sexual assault.
Constand and her lawyers issued a statement calling the ruling disappointing and expressed fear that it could discourage sexual assault victims from coming forward in the future. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, we thank you for watching.